Welcome to my channel. Emily Carter sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, casting shadows across the room as the evening light faded. She had been working on a design project for hours, but her mind kept wandering to Daniel. He had promised to be home by 7, but it was already past 9, and he hadn't even bothered to text. She sighed, running a hand through her tousled auburn hair. Daniel had always been like this, charming but unreliable, attentive one moment and distant the next. Lately, though, the distance between them had grown into a chasm. He spent more time at the gym than at home, and when he was around he was distracted, his phone buzzing incessantly with messages he never explained. Emily closed her laptop and stood, stretching her stiff limbs. She wandered into the kitchen, her bare feet padding softly against the cool tile. The apartment felt empty, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She poured herself a glass of wine, the rich red liquid swirling in the glass as she leaned against the counter. Her phone buzzed on the countertop and she glanced at it, hoping it was Daniel. Instead, it was a notification from a social media app. She swiped it away, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Why was she always the one waiting, the one worrying? She had given Daniel everything, her time, her trust, her heart, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping away. Determined to shake off her unease, Emily grabbed her keys and headed out the door. The gym was only a few blocks away, and if Daniel wasn't going to come home, she would go to him. Maybe seeing her would remind him of what he had, of what they had built together. The night air was cool against her skin as she walked, her thoughts a tangled mess of hope and fear. She rehearsed what she would say to him, how she would confront him about his distance without sounding accusatory. But as she approached the gym, her confidence wavered. The building was dark, the windows reflecting the streetlights like blank, unseeing eyes. She hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering over the door handle. Then she heard voices, low and muffled, but unmistakably coming from inside. She pushed the door open, the faint creak of the hinges drowned out by the sound of laughter. The gym was dimly lit, the equipment casting long shadows across the floor. Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed the sound of the voices, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. As she rounded the corner, she saw them. 2 men, their backs to her, standing near the far wall. She recognized them instantly. Marcus and Jamal, Daniel's closest friends and fellow trainers. They were leaning against the wall, their heads close together as they talked. Emily's stomach churned as she approached, her unease growing with every step. "Hey!" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus and Jamal turned, their expressions shifting from surprise to guilt in an instant. "Emily," Marcus said, his voice too casual, too forced. "What are you doing here?" "I was looking for Daniel," she replied, her eyes narrowing as she studied their faces. "Do you know where he is?" Jamal exchanged a glance with Marcus, his jaw tightening. "He's not here," he said finally, his tone evasive. Emily crossed her arms, her patience wearing thin. "Then where is he? And why are you 2 here if the gym is closed?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. "Look, Emily, it's not our place to say." "Not your place to say what?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "What's going on? Where's Daniel?" There was a long pause, the air thick with tension. Finally Jamal spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "Daniel's been seeing someone else," he said, his words hitting Emily like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, her mind reeling. "What? Who?" "Sarah," Marcus said quietly. "She works here too. They've been meeting up after hours." Emily felt the room spin around her, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Sarah. The name echoed in her mind, a cruel reminder of everything she had feared. She had seen Sarah at the gym before, young, beautiful, confident. Everything Emily felt she wasn't. "How long?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus and Jamal exchanged another glance, their silence speaking volumes. "How long?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Months," Jamal admitted, his tone heavy with regret. Emily felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned on her heel, her mind racing as she stumbled toward the door. She needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. But as she reached the exit, Marcus called after her. "Emily, wait. There's something else you should know." She paused, her hand on the doorframe, but she didn't turn around. "They've been using the mirror's toilet," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's where they meet." Emily's stomach churned at the implication, the image of Daniel and Sarah together burning into her mind. She pushed the door open and stepped into the night, the cool air doing little to soothe the fire raging inside her. As she walked away, her tears finally spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. But beneath the pain, a spark of determination ignited. She would confront Daniel, not as the broken woman he had left behind, but as someone stronger, someone who refused to be defined by his betrayal. The night stretched out before her, dark and uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Emily's footsteps echoed through the empty gym as she followed Marcus and Jamal down the dimly lit hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a painful reminder of the betrayal she had just uncovered. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. Marcus led the way, his broad shoulders tense beneath his fitted t-shirt. Jamal walked beside him, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a palpable unease. Emily trailed behind them, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold together the pieces of her shattered world. They stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway, its surface unremarkable except for a small, faded sign that read, "Private." Marcus hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "Are you sure you want to see this?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Emily nodded, her jaw clenched. "I need to know." Marcus exchanged a glance with Jamal, who gave a reluctant nod. With a deep breath, Marcus pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit bathroom. The room was sparse, with a single sink, a toilet, and a large mirror that covered the entire back wall. The mirror was the focal point, its surface gleaming faintly in the soft light. Emily stepped inside, her eyes drawn to the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of pain and determination. "This is where they met," Jamal said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel and Sarah. They'd come here after hours, when no one else was around." Emily's stomach churned as she looked around the room, her mind conjuring images of Daniel and Sarah together. She could almost see them, their bodies pressed against the mirror, their reflections intertwined in a cruel parody of intimacy. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why here?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his shaved head. Daniel said it was exciting. The risk of getting caught, the secrecy. He said it made him feel alive. Emily felt a fresh wave of anger and hurt wash over her. She had given Daniel everything, her love, her trust, her loyalty, and yet it hadn't been enough. He had chosen Sarah over her. She turned to Marcus and Jamal, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and defiance. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Jamal shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. "We didn't want to get involved," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But we couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve to know the truth." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Daniel's our friend, but what he's doing, it's not right. We didn't want to be a part of it anymore." Emily stared at them, her mind racing. She had always seen Marcus and Jamal as extensions of Daniel, as part of his world rather than hers. But now they were here, standing with her, offering her the truth when Daniel had only given her lies. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, "for telling me." Marcus and Jamal nodded, their expressions a mixture of relief and guilt. They lingered for a moment, as if unsure of what to do next, before Jamal finally spoke. "We'll give you some time," he said, his voice gentle. "If you need anything, just let us know." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She watched as they left the room, the door closing softly behind them. Alone in the mirror's toilet, she felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. She turned back to the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes. The woman in the mirror looked broken, defeated, but Emily knew she couldn't stay that way. She had to confront Daniel, to face the truth head-on, no matter how much it hurt. With a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders, her reflection mimicking her movements. She wiped the tears from her cheeks, her resolve hardening with each passing second. "This isn't the end," she whispered to her reflection, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "This is just the beginning." She turned and walked out of the bathroom, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The gym was silent, the air thick with the weight of everything that had happened. But as Emily stepped out into the night, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The truth had shattered her world, but it had also set her free. She no longer had to live in the shadow of Daniel's lies, no longer had to wonder if she was enough. She was Emily Carter, and she was stronger than she had ever realized. As she walked away from the gym, her mind began to race with plans, with possibilities. She would confront Daniel, not as the broken woman he had left behind, but as someone who refused to be defined by his betrayal. The night stretched out before her, dark and uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. Emily stood outside Daniel's apartment, her hand trembling as she raised it to knock on the door. The night air was cool against her skin, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside her. She had spent the last hour rehearsing what she would say, but now, standing here, the words felt hollow, inadequate. She knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. For a moment there was silence, and then the sound of footsteps approaching the door. It swung open, revealing Daniel, his hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled, as if he had just woken up. "Emily," he said, his voice tinged with surprise and a hint of guilt. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the apartment for any sign of Sarah. The living room was cluttered, the coffee table littered with empty beer bottles and takeout containers. It was a stark contrast to the neat, orderly home they had shared, and it only fueled her anger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Daniel closed the door and followed her into the living room, his expression wary. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Emily turned to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. "No, Daniel, everything is not okay. I know about Sarah." The color drained from Daniel's face, his confident demeanor crumbling in an instant. "Emily, Don't," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't try to explain or make excuses. I know everything. I know about the mirror's toilet, about how you've been sneaking around behind my back for months." Daniel sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "I never meant to hurt you." Emily felt a fresh wave of anger surge through her. "You never meant to hurt me. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything we had, everything I thought we were." Daniel looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I know I messed up, Emily. I know I've been selfish and stupid. But I love you. I never stopped loving you." Emily shook her head, her tears spilling over. "You don't get to say that, Daniel. You don't get to claim you love me after everything you've done. Love doesn't lie, doesn't cheat, doesn't betray." Daniel reached out to her, but she stepped back out of his reach. "Please, Emily," he said, his voice pleading. "Give me another chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Emily stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. She had loved Daniel with everything she had believed in him, trusted him. But now, looking at him, she saw a stranger, someone she no longer recognized. "I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't keep living in the shadow of your lies, Daniel. I deserve better than that. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his defeat palpable. I understand, he said quietly. I hope you can forgive me someday. Emily wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. Maybe someday, she said. But not today. She turned and walked to the door, her heart heavy but her mind clear. As she reached for the doorknob, Daniel spoke again, his voice soft and filled with regret. I'm sorry, Emily. For everything. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't turn around. I know, she said. But sorry isn't enough. With that, she opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving Daniel and the shattered remnants of their relationship behind. The cool air washed over her, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the apartment. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with the lingering pain. It was over, finally over, and though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew she had taken the first step toward healing. As she walked away, her mind began to race with plans, with possibilities. She would rebuild her life, piece by piece, and she would do it on her own terms. The night stretched out before her, dark and uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning.